Hello everyone, this is BritSimon. One of the questions I get most commonly on my blog is this one. When will I be interviewed? Let's see if I can give you an answer about that in today's episode. Okay, let's get into this. Firstly, let me just ask this. I know people are going to be confused about what I'm going to explain in this video. I would like people to try and watch the whole video at least one time, perhaps a couple of times, to understand all of the concepts. Please don't try and skip forward to your region and try and think you've understood the whole process and everything else because you watched 30 seconds of this video. You need to watch the whole video and understand that I may make comments about one region that could apply to your region too. So please watch the whole video through. Secondly, I just want to ask, please hit the like button if you like this information. Subscribe to my channel if you'd like a little bit more of this sort of information. Hopefully you're finding the videos I'm producing useful and interesting. I hope that's the case. That's certainly my intention. So please give my channel a little bit of support by pressing the like button and subscribe, and that will help me get my message out to more of the lottery winners so that people can process their cases successfully. Thank you for that. Okay, let's get into the discussion about the timing of your interview. So as you can see, I've got a spreadsheet open which has got the months of the year, October to September. Just a quick point about the lottery year. It starts on the 1st of October and ends on the 30th of September. So for DV2020, this is going to be October the 1st, 2019, ending on 30th of September 2020. There are 12 months in a year, and for our example here, I'm going to make up a fictitious example region and suggest that this particular example region has 36,000 as the highest case number that we've seen assigned. Okay, so when do you think would be a good idea for KCC to interview those cases, let's say all 36,000? Would it make sense for them to interview all of those cases in October and November, let's say? No, of course not. Would make no sense at all. They have limited resources at KCC, and each of the embassies have limited resources, and so what they try and do is they would want to spread that workload over the whole 12-month period. That's the first concept I want you to understand. They are going to use the full 12 months of the year. They're not going to speed things up just because your case number 35,500, you cannot be interviewed earlier than your month. Okay, that being said, so let's take a look at the 36,000 and we'll see how they might spread this workload over the full year. They could, for example, look at the workload and say, okay, we'll spread it equally over the 12 months of the year at 3,000 cases or case numbers over the year, over each month of the year. And that would be 3,000 in each of those months, and cumulatively we'd have 3,000 in the first month, 6,000 in the next month, and so on. Okay, as you can see, that's going to be dealing with the whole number range within the 12 months of the year. That's one possibility, but it isn't normally as simple as that. So let me explain further. Now, over the last few years, I've noticed that KCC don't actually like to start very busily at the beginning of the year. I think this is to do with the tidy up from the previous year. So what I mean by that is that in October, and when they're trying to schedule interviews for October, which will be work that they'll do in August and September, they will be wanting to focus more on completing DV 2019, the previous year, in any given year. So what I've noticed is that at this time of the year, when they should be actually asking people to submit their documents, they're not doing that, and that's going to reduce the number of visas possibility, or the number of interviews, I should say, that will be performed in the early months. So there is a natural tendency for the visa bulletin to start off slowly. So let's reduce this to 2,500, and we'll do that for a couple of the months. Okay, and we'll see what that does to our year. Okay, so here you can see I've started the year slowly in October and November, 2,500 in each of those numbers, and then I've increased to 3,100 for the remainder, for each month for the remainder of the year. These are the monthly changes, and this gives the cumulative effect of those changes right to the end of the year. We finish up at the same point, but the work is quieter at the beginning of the year. So that's the first concept that I'd like to talk about in that section. It's really the second concept. Now the other thing is that December is a holiday. There's Thanksgiving in November. That's another reason they don't like a busy November. December has the holidays, Christmas, and then the New Year holiday going into January. So for that reason, they typically will reduce the December month as well. They won't do so much work in the December month. So now I've got to add another 600 to some of these numbers. So we'll just spread that workload over the year, and we're almost there. So this can go up to 32,850, and we'll be there. Okay, so that's an indication of how we do, how we could see that going, and that's taking care of a low month, October, November, and December. Okay, there's our numbers. Now, one further concept is that KCC would rather the embassies have time to focus on the last remaining cases in the closing months of the year. So generally speaking, if they can avoid having a busy September for the embassies, they will do that. They're not always able to do that, but that's the ideal plan. So I'm going to take out, let's say, 1,800 from September, and I'm going to spread that throughout the year, earlier in the year. So that's going to leave us with 2350. 2350, no, 1350, beg your pardon. 1350 in September, and I'm going to increase some of these months by 300, so we'll call it 3450. And we'll do that for 6 months. Right, so that's our 6 months. Right, and we're back to our 36,000. So what we can see now is that the visa progression, visa bulletin progression would start off a little bit slowly. Then it would start to get busy in January, February, March, April, May, and up to June. July, August, and September hopefully would be slowing down. All things being equal, if there was no other factors, this would be roughly the way KCC would want the numbers to behave. It would be that sort of flow. Of course, though, there's much more to the process than this simplistic view. So, okay, these are the concepts we've learned so far. Now we have to think about a further concept. It's true that you cannot get your 2NL until all three of the following things are true. Your case number needs to be current. Current means that your number is below the number shown on the visa bulletin. Additionally, your DS-260 must have been processed. So for those of you that submitted earlier in the year, That DS260 would have been processed in the background by KCC, various security checks would have been taken, etc., and they have processed your form. It generally takes a month or 2 months to process those DS260s, although no case is exactly the same as another. So some cases would take longer to process that than another case, depending on your travel history, your employment record, where you were born, etc. Those things will affect your DS260 processing. Finally, and this is the important bit, the new procedure that was introduced for documents at the beginning of 2019 is affecting the 2NL as well. So your documents must have been submitted to KCC, they must have accepted those and processed them. This new procedure with regard to documents has caused some difficulties at the end of DV 2019. The procedure is new, and with all new big government procedures, there's been delays and things are not going quite as they should be. Hopefully, in DV 2020 and subsequent years, the procedures will be better worked out and hopefully will work better. But essentially, you cannot ideally just send your documents to KCC. They ideally should be asking you for the documents, and they do that based on roughly the order that they expect to order to invite cases. So in other words, if you've got a high case number, KCC will not ask you to submit documents until some time to come, perhaps even next year. What they should be doing right now, as of July 2019, is they should be asking low case number holders to submit their documents. I have seen comments from people that they're doing that. There certainly are a number of cases who have been asked to submit their documents to KCC. And that's great. Hopefully then KCC will process those in due course. However, if your number is current and your DS260 has been submitted in time for an October interview, but you've not been asked to send the documents or you've not sent those documents, then you still can't be scheduled for interview. Now, it's important to note that October is the beginning date for 2020 interviews. Interviews for DV 2020 will take place between October 1st, 2019 and September 30th, 2020. So over that period of time, cases will be scheduled based on the three factors that I'm showing on the screen. So you can see that if KCC are slow to ask you to submit documents or you're slow to return them, that is going to impact your ability to be scheduled even if your number is current. So what does that have to do with our number predictions? Well, as I mentioned earlier, towards the end of any given DV lottery year, KCC will be spending more of their time focused on closing out cases from the previous year than they will be spending time on preparing for the following year. It's likely, therefore, that they won't have enough cases who are completely ready for scheduling for October. What they do in that case is they could choose, and this is a possibility, not a certainty, they could choose to increase the visa bulletin number in October and perhaps even November in order to yield enough cases which are ready for scheduling. So, for example, let's say they want to schedule 200 cases. And let's say they make 200 cases current by making the case number 1000. Okay, if 1000 case number reveals 200 cases, but only 50 of those cases are ready for scheduling, then they're going to increase the case number in the visa bulletin in order to reveal more cases that are ready for scheduling. That means that in some years we've seen them start with an artificially high visa bulletin number, and then progress has been slow after that point. Let me show you an example of that. So here I'm showing you my website, and there is a navigation bar at the top of the page with the visa bulletin numbers. And these are the historical visa bulletin numbers over the last 20 years or so. You can read a little bit about that, and then you can see this spreadsheet. This spreadsheet is actually something I maintain here, and I've got each of the regions with case number history going back to the mid-90s. So every month is in there. It's interesting information, but I would caution you to be careful with these numbers because not every year is the same. You can't look at this data and say, oh, this year is going to be exactly like 2013. The number is going to be this. If, for example, the Europe case number started in October at 5,700. Does that mean November is going to be 7,000? No, it doesn't mean that. These numbers are totally different. But what we can take from this information is a rough idea of the progression that we've seen in the past, and we can try and interpret that data, and we can then put that in the context of the current year's numbers, the DV2020 numbers. So let me show you something that's interesting here. For Africa, if we have a look at DV 2018, you can see the number there started off at 8,500 for October, and in November only increased by 100 numbers, and then only increased by 1,400 numbers the month after that, December. This is kind of the slow start thing I'm talking about. But October, it was unusually high. It wasn't an equal jump between those first 3 months. So what's going on there? Well, this is a pretty good example of what I was just describing. In October, they decided to set the number at 8,500, and then the following month, they didn't need to increase the number very much to get extra cases that were ready for scheduling. All they had to do was now look at the first 8,500 cases, or just increase that by 100 cases, to have more cases to schedule, because now more of those cases will have been processed through their DS260 and so on. The same sort of thing happened in December, and it's not until quite later along that we start to see quite high progression. Okay, so that's where KCC will raise or lower the visa bulletin number in order to yield the right number of cases that are ready for scheduling so that they can schedule and keep the embassies busy to whatever level they've decided. So they might, for example, decide that the embassies can handle 1,500 cases in October. They would set the visa bulletin number for October at the right level to get 1,500 cases based on DS260 being submitted and the documents being submitted, and then by that method decide what number they need to set the visa bulletin at. That's actually how the processing happens month to month. So that's our fifth concept. Let's apply that to our example data here, our example region. If I take the visa progression for the first 3 months, what I'm going to do is I'm going to lower December and say they only progressed by 1,000 cases. And the same thing in November. And this is just an approximation, obviously, just to show the concept. So I've taken 1,500 cases from there, from December and November. I'm going to add the 3,000 cases onto October. And I'm simulating, therefore, a high start to the year with then just a smaller increase in November, a small increase in December, and then January, February, around that time, we would start seeing things move. So the visa number that we would see published would start off at 5,500, would increase very, in a low way. People, and this will be quite interesting. People will rejoice when they see a high number at the beginning of the year. We might even see another big increase in November. And then there'll be much wringing of hands and worry and consternation when in December, we see it doesn't increase very much, okay? Just relax. This is a process. This is something that goes on every year. So don't get too excited by the numbers that we see month to month. The number doesn't necessarily determine where we're going to finish, and where we're going to finish is more important than the progression throughout the year. Okay, so that now needs to be applied to each of our 5 regions. Let's go through and make some rough estimations based on this. I do have one further important concept to explain that will kind of change this a little bit, but I think if we just apply this fifth concept, we've got a reasonable idea, at least for the first quarter or two, of how the numbers are going to go. Okay, so let's do that now. Let me just first say I'm pretty sure I'm going to regret providing this data, because undoubtedly I'm going to hear from someone, oh, you said it was going to be 500 in October and it's only 470, and so why did you get that wrong? Please understand, long-range forecasts, like long-range weather forecasts, are naturally going to be inaccurate. As we go through the year, we get a better and better idea of how things are going to go. But at this point in July, predicting what's going to happen in October or predicting what's going to happen a year from now is very difficult. And I'm expecting people to be adult about it and understand that things will change over time. There could be factors that we don't yet know about, or there could be all sorts of changes. So again, I can tell you what the weather will be this afternoon. You can look out the window and tell that. But can you tell me what the weather will be in a year's time from now? No, probably not. And so, you need to be that realistic. These are guesstimates at this time. Okay, so that being said, please understand this is just an illustration of what could happen, and hopefully gives you a little bit of an idea so you can plan and go from there. So I've applied the 5 concepts we've talked about to the 5 regions, and these are the rough numbers that I'm going to show you at the moment. For each of the regions, I've started off with the maximum case number that I know of at the moment. That is not a solid number. That's a slight guess based on information that I've received from people telling me what their case number is, etc. In AF, I'm going to take that as 75,000. I'm also going to make an assumption that each region will go completely current. That is a big assumption to make at this point. It's not entirely certain by any means, and there may be some limitations on some countries, such as Egypt, for example, or Nepal might be slowed down. But for now, just to give an illustration, I'm going to assume the maximum case number, and I'm going to assume that by the end of the year, KCC want to be at the maximum case number in each region. That may or may not be the case, we'll see. So I'm going to assume also that factor number 5, our condition number 5, is true. So I'm going to assume a fairly high start in October, a smallish increase in the following couple of months, and then beginning to ramp up to speed in January, February, March. Again, we'll see what happens. So my predictions are roughly these. This line here shows you the monthly increase, and this line shows you the visa bulletin number that would be out there month to month. Okay, so I'm going to predict just roughly that we're going to see Africa at around about 12,000. Might be 10,000, might be 12,000, but that sort of number. By November, it'll be at 15,000, December would be 18,000, and then we would start to see some increases in January and February, fairly decent increases all the way through until the end of the year. Okay, that's Africa. Asia region, I predict we're going to be starting off at around about 4,000, case number 4,000 in the first month. Might be 3,000, but we'll see. Nepal might be limited from the beginning, but Nepal actually has quite high case numbers this time around, so we'll see if these are true. And then I think November and December will see smallish increases as we get catch up from October, and we'll see the numbers increasing this way. 2,800 numbers will increase, let's say, from January through to June. And these would be how the numbers go. Now, if at any time they decide they can't get to 30,000 because they've got enough people, then these numbers could be radically different. We'll see. In EU, here are the numbers. Again, I'm assuming the maximum case number of 57,000. That's about the highest number I've heard of. It may be a little bit higher or lower than the real number, but that's the number I've heard of. Let's again assume that they start off with this 5th factor with a high October, and then do a 2,500 increase for the next couple of months and 5,500 increase thereafter for a few months. Okay, and so in that way, these would be the numbers year to date. For Oceania, same thing. I'm going to assume a higher number to get to a target of 3,000. I'm less sure about this number than the other regions in terms of that being the highest case number. It might only be a 2,800, but I'm going to assume a 3,000. And I assume that it's going to start off fairly high and go on from there with a slight progression, and that's how the number could progress to 3,000. And then for South America, I believe the highest number is around about 3,900. I'm going to assume it's going to start off at 640, increase by 100 in the months of November, December, and then we'll see a progression over the time towards 3,900. So I'm making some pretty big, bold predictions there. I don't want you to rely on these as gospel. Please do remember these are the beginning, just the beginning numbers, and this is complete guesswork at the moment based on very little actual information and also trying to predict things that haven't actually happened yet, right? So, there's a lot of factors here. Okay, with those numbers being stated, there's one final concept that I'd like to explain. In previous years, up to now, we've seen increasing holes rate in later numbers. We talked about holes in another video. Hopefully you understand this concept of holes. And hopefully if you've either seen my videos or read my blog pages on the subject, you will understand why holes are created. First of all, there's a uniform number that would be a reality in any of the regions. Roughly, if we look at Oceania, for example, that's a good example, where the holes rate is roughly consistent throughout the whole number range. Okay, in Oceania in DV2019, here is the holes rate. We could say that's something around about 7 to 10%, let's say, just roughly. Oceania and South America have a consistent profile in terms of the holes rate. You can see that throughout the number range, there's a standard, if you like, standard number of holes. For the other three regions, there's a different pattern that emerges. Africa starts off at a certain level of holes here represented by this blue color. And then later number ranges see increasing number of holes, less actual real cases. This is what we call density reducing or holes increasing. Term it either way you like, but that's basically what it means. It's an increase in the number of cases which are not real cases. So this happens because in three regions, Africa, Asia, and Europe, there are a number of countries which are restricted during the draw process in a typical year. These countries are countries such as Uzbekistan, Ukraine for Europe, in Asia, Nepal and Iran, in Africa, Ghana, who else we have? Egypt. These sort of countries are restricted during the draw process. However, this year I've seen numbers in Ghana that go quite high. I've seen numbers in Egypt that go very high. I've seen numbers for Nepal cities that go quite high. And there has been a definite change in the way that numbers have been allocated. And as we know, there's a lot more holes in this year. So we don't know yet whether we will see a reduction in density or an increase in the holes in those three big regions in DV 2020. If we do see that happening, what it means is that as we progress through the numbers towards the end of the year, the progression in month to month in later number ranges increases. Okay, and if you see previous years, if we just have a look at previous years, we can see that happening. Let's find a reasonable example. If we look back at our 2018, it's probably a reasonable example. 8,500 in the first month, by month, 3, we're on 10,000, then a 3,000 increase, a 1,000 increase there. Then we had a couple of thousand increase, then 4,000 increase, again 3 or 4,000 increase. Then we get a 4,000 increase, and then here we go. There's a 10,000 increase from June to July, right? Much larger increase than earlier on. That's because of the case number density I was talking about. Same sort of thing we can see in DV2019. The number increased between May and June by almost 13,000 numbers there, whereas it had increased by perhaps 6,000 numbers in previous months. So what that's an indication of is this reducing density that we see in the 3 big regions: Asia, Europe, and Africa. That may factor into the visa bulletin progression. That tends to produce lower speed of progression at the beginning of the year for the first 6 to 8 months, let's say, and much faster progression in the later part of the year. We'll see whether that's a factor or not in this year. I haven't built it into my models because I don't know for 100% certainty that we're going to see that sort of reduction in density. Okay. So I hope this was interesting for you. This is going to be the end of the video, but it's a difficult subject. I understand. Thank you for your patience. I understand it's a long video, but a lot of people have asked for this information. And whilst I don't like giving predictions because predictions are so easily made wrong, I do want to fill the information void with some accurate information rather than letting people come up with their own ideas and getting things totally wrong and spreading that bad information. So hopefully this has been useful and some of the concepts now are better understood. Okay, I hope you liked the video. Smash that like button, subscribe to my channel to get more content like this, and please do read my blog and come back and read and listen to more of my videos. Thank you.